gonna start. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are going to get started in just a few minutes, but while we are waiting for people to get logged on, we've got two questions for you. One, we would love to know where you are zooming in from. Our library system spans 5 counties, and so it's always fun to see where you are located this evening. And then our second question, because we're going to be talking about hiking, we really want to know who is out there. And so we would love to see in the chat if you consider yourself an avid hiker, an occasional hiker, or not really a big hiker, but you're curious to learn more. Let's see, we got some chats coming in. Ooh, Freda, Leavenworth, great. Thanks so much for being here tonight. So we'll just give it a few minutes to let people are still coming in. Oh, we got Seattle, great, year-round hiker, awesome. Somewhat avid, Seattle. Great. People are excited to come. Ooh, Moses Lake, Leavenworth. Great. We've got Chelan and Grant County here tonight. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. If you are just logging on, before we get started, we're asking two questions. One, where are you? Here's Wenatchee, avid hiker. We got a lot of avid hikers tonight. Where are you zooming in from? And if you would consider yourself an avid hiker, an occasional hiker, or a weekend warrior, or not really a big hiker, but you're really curious. We got Spokane here. We're spanning the state right now, so that is awesome. Spokane, OMAC, just curious. Hey, Carla, thanks for being here. We love curious people. Kashmir, this is really exciting. Great. Well, things are slowing down on the sign on, so I'm going to get us started. It's 6:01, and Holly and Shelby have so much to share with us. So, Wenatchee Night here. Hello, Scott. Thanks for joining us. So let's get started. Hello, everyone. If you haven't seen me before on virtual programming, my name is Alicia. I'm the Adult Services Manager here at NCW Libraries, and we are so excited for you to join us for exploring winter hikes around Central Washington with Washington Trails Associate. We've got two ambassadors here tonight, Holly and Shelby. We offered another hike about Central Washington. I think it was in this maybe late summer, and it was such a hit. We got so much feedback. People were so excited to hear Holly's insider tips that we had to invite them back, focusing on winter hikes. So really excited to have them here tonight. And if you're not aware, NCW Libraries is comprised of 30 branches, and we span 5 counties. And so it's really exciting to have people from across our system here tonight. And our mission is to connect the people of NCW to vital resources and opportunities that foster individual growth and strengthen communities. So by joining us here tonight, you're really helping us fulfill that mission. So thank you for taking time out and joining us. Just a few little quick housekeeping things. It's really fun to see. I see some people have their cameras on. You don't have to have your camera on, but we love seeing your faces. It helps it feel more interactive. And then we would just ask you to keep yourself on mute to decrease that background noise. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end. But if you have a question during the program, feel free to put that in the chat at any time. Holly and Shelby are totally open to stopping during a hike promo to talk about that specific hike. So don't hold back with your questions. And yeah, two little commercials before I pass it over to Shelby and Holly are, if you're not familiar, we have a really cool collection called the Library of Things. So we don't have just books. And so two things I'm going to plug tonight are, we have our Checkout Washington kit. This is something that has the Discover Pass, which will gain you access to any of our state parks. It has field guides to birds and plants in Washington state. It's got a pair of binoculars, and it also has a map of Washington state parks. So I'm going to put a link in the chat after I stop talking, so you can put a request on that, and they'll send that to your local library. And the other cool thing is, now that we finally have snow, we have snowshoes that you can check out, which is really exciting. We've got them in multiple sizes, so I would just look on those links because they will tell you based on kind of your body size what will be the best pair for you. So I'll put those links in the chat. But without further ado, I will pass it on over to Holly and Shelby. Thank you so much for being here tonight and guiding us through some really exciting locations in our service area.
Thank you so much, Alicia. And hello, everyone. I'll kick us off. My name is Holly Weiler. I'm the Eastern Washington Regional Senior Coordinator for Washington Trails Association. It's a mouthful of a title. And I'm a WTA employee. My home base is Spokane County, and I do work including outreach events, advocacy work, and leading volunteer trail crews for a wide area in Eastern Washington. And so a lot of the work that I do includes Okanogan and Ferry County. We have other employees with WTA who are leading trail work trips in Chelan County, and we are gradually branching out to other areas in Central Washington. And then a lot of the work that I do is more in Eastern Washington with Ferry, well, I've said Ferry, also Stevens, Pend Oreille, Asotin, Lincoln. So we have several areas where I'm doing work. And then of course, I've been a longtime avid hiker. And so a lot of what I'm going to share tonight are just personal trips I've done, not necessarily trail work trips, but places that I have been in Central Washington that I really wanted to share about. And then helping me tonight is Shelby, because I haven't been to a lot of places in Central Washington. I'm learning tonight as well. So Shelby, give you a chance to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Holly. So my name is Shelby King, and I'm an ambassador for WTA. I actually moved to the state of Washington in the year 2020, but I really hit the trails hard. So I'm also an avid hiker and backpacker. We were furloughed on Fridays, so every Friday I was out hiking and really like getting to know the trails around Central Washington. And then I've also been involved in WTA doing trail work parties, which are always a lot of fun.
And then just thank you all for joining us tonight. Always like to start off with just an overview, just a little bit about WTA. We are a statewide nonprofit organization. We mobilize hikers and everyone who loves the outdoors to explore, steward, and champion trails and public lands so that there are trails for everyone forever. And there are several aspects of the work that we do across the state. And so it's more than just trail work, and it's more than just sharing hiking information, although that's a lot of what we do. We also have really strong advocacy on behalf of hikers, so really championing causes that are important to hikers across the state. We do have a robust trail maintenance program all across the entire state of Washington. We have some youth-specific programming that tends to be majority on the western side of the state, but that is slowly changing and coming onto Eastern Washington and Central Washington as well. Of course, our website is a valuable resource for hikers. And if you haven't had a chance to check that out yet, I encourage you to bookmark WTA.org. There is a really robust hiking guide that has information about hikes all across the state of Washington, and then a resource that you could actually add to through the trip reporting feature. So that is hikers all across the state sharing information about where they've been in order to provide a little inspiration for others to go and visit those places. It's actually my favorite thing to do on a Monday morning. I pull up the trip reports and I see where have people been over the weekend, so that I can see if there's some place that somebody's been that I haven't been to yet. So I'm always looking for something that's brand new to me. And then of course the community building that comes from all of those resources coming together. And then just a reminder that there's like a lot of different types of hiking in the winter in Central Washington. So it can look like this. This is a photo from a trip I did a few years ago where I was with a group that summited Sherman Peak, which is in Ferry County. And this is definitely a robust winter hike where typically snowshoes are required, not just suggested. We would have been post-holing hip deep on this hike without our snowshoes. But it can also look like this, which is a view of Steamboat Rock on a day that didn't have any snow. So you can see that none of the trees have leafed out yet. It's still wintertime, but it practically felt like spring. I think those are some chunks of ice floating out there in the water. So you can have sunshine bluebird days with or without snow in central Washington. And you can also have some pretty interesting real winter weather conditions depending on what the weather forecast is. Because certainly there have been the days where I've had to cancel trips because of blowing and gusting snow and drifts occurring on some of the roadways. So always a good idea to check that weather forecast. And so this is where I always like to encourage safety first for any of these hikes. For those of you who are familiar with Leave No Trace guidelines, plan ahead and prepare is Leave No Trace number 1. So to really know what you're getting into before you even get out the door. And that helps keep yourself safe and also everyone who's with you to make sure that your outing is fun. For those of you who have done a little trail work with WTA, you've probably heard that we only have 3 rules on WTA work parties, and it's always be safe, number 1, and then have fun, number 2. Work is always last, even for trail work. And certainly when you're out on a hike in any of our beautiful areas, we want safety and fun to be top priorities. I also like to share just a little bit of information about avalanche risk, because as we are recreating in the wintertime, there are some popular trails that are maybe even easily accessible summer trails and easily accessible even into winter, but they could have some avalanche risk. And so to help minimize that risk, I always recommend checking trip reports for snow information. So see if someone else has been to that area recently. And if they have, see what they have to say about it. And then I also pull up maps that show slope angle. So this is a screenshot example of what that looks like, but it helps a person to identify potential avalanche terrain, to know which portions of a trail are safe and which are potentially unsafe. So this example is Ferry County, Sherman Peak, the trip that I talked about at the beginning. And with this one, you can see where the black and blue and red lines are. That is very steep avalanche terrain. And so when I talk about this hike in the presentation, I have a very specific recommendation to not try to complete the full Sherman Peak loop. It's a very popular and easy route in the summer that has enough avalanche terrain in it that I only ever hike the western part of this loop when I'm there in the winter. And it's just because I can see from the slope angle that that's a slope that has the potential to slide. And so particularly if I've checked the regional forecasts, and Northwest Avalanche Center is a great one if you are doing any hikes on the eastern slope of the Cascades. And then I find that sometimes that forecast isn't necessarily super accurate as you get into the Kettle Crest area. And so I also cross-reference Idaho Panhandle Avalanche Center because the Kettles don't have a specific avalanche forecast. But it's a way to make informed decisions before even going out the door. And if the avalanche centers are saying there's a high risk of avalanche, that might not be a great day to do the Sherman Peak Loop. And then Shelby, did you have some additional info for this one?
Sure. So I just wanted or was gonna let you guys know about NWAC's avalanche awareness classes. So these classes are offered for free by NWAC, and they're offered like all over the state of Washington. We just had a couple that were offered. I'm based out of Ellensburg, so we had one based in Ellensburg and also the Cle-Elum area, but they're all over the state of Washington. It's free and it helps you identify avalanche terrain, which is very important if you're going into the mountains during the winter, knowing when you are and when you aren't in avalanche terrain. But yeah, just always checking that NWAC forecast before going out, I'd say was the key.
Thank you. So some additional things that you might need as you venture out for a winter hike. backpack with the 10 essentials. So I always figure this one is crucial regardless of time of year. But certainly it becomes a little bit more important in winter because you might be able to be fine on a summer trip if you forget your extra dry clothing. But if you're out on a winter trip and your clothing gets wet and you don't have extras, there becomes a real risk of going into hypothermia. And so I always like really double check my 10 essentials, and I sometimes even pack extra items when I'm going on winter trips, just because it's like the temperatures can be a lot more into the extremes and into ranges that can become dangerous very quickly. And then in terms of what you need to have on your feet, it really varies a lot depending on what the current conditions are. So there are trips that I have done where all I needed was waterproof shoes. And then there have been trips where I needed heavy duty, waterproof, insulated boots. And I needed to pair them with either micro spikes if it was just a little bit icy, or snowshoes if I needed that extra flotation on top of the snow. So really it can vary a lot depending on where you're going and what current conditions are. Warm winter layers never include cotton. Cotton gets wet and stays wet and traps that moisture next to your skin. And so my favorite thing to do in the winter is just 50 million layers of wool. But synthetics are also a really good choice. But really, it's so important to avoid cotton clothing when you venture out in the wintertime. I like to have adjustable poles just for helping with balance, and baskets on the poles become very important if there's snow on the ground, particularly if the snow is deep. And then some of the places we're going to talk about tonight do require passes for your vehicle. And that's a thing to research before you go. But just broadly, if it is a Washington State Park, Department of Natural Resources, or Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife property, then a Discover Pass would be required at that location. And then additionally, some areas become snow parks in winter, and that requires a snow park permit in order to park in those parking lots. And so it's a good thing to research that info before you go so that you can have the pass that you need, because oftentimes, particularly in the winter, there are not venues close to the trailhead that have those items for sale. And I touched on this a little bit, but what to wear for winter hikes includes layers, lots of them. And it also includes a lot of what I call costume changes. I have been known to carry a complete additional set of clothing, particularly when I'm doing mountain summits. And I carry it in a dry bag in my backpack. And when I get to the summit of the mountain, I do a complete costume change, because no matter how much I try to pace myself, I am a person who sweats. And once I get sweaty, it's really hard to regulate core body temperature. So I'll talk about Columbia Mountain in a little bit. And I remember a trip where I got to the summit, I immediately changed all of my clothing. And then I was actually quite comfortable for the trip back down, because you're never working as hard as you're descending a mountain. So again, that synthetic or wool and extra clothing, and especially be prepared to change into dry clothing as needed. A hat is very helpful. Sunglasses. I once made the mistake of arriving at a trailhead on a foggy day and forgetting the sunglasses in the car. Oftentimes there are these temperature inversions and fog hanging low, and then you get up higher elevation and all of a sudden you're out in the sunshine. And so sunglasses can be very important, particularly if there's snow on the ground, because you can get the reflection off of the snow and it can lead to sun blindness, which I basically had by the end of that trip. It was not a fun end of the day. And then don't forget sunscreen, lots of it, really high SPF, because the reflection off of the snow can cause severe burns very quickly. And don't forget silly things like putting sunscreen inside of your nostrils, because the reflection off of the snow can make the sun shine in places it normally doesn't. And so you can actually, I heard a story one time about a person who was hiking up a steep hill and was breathing through her mouth and got a little bit of a sunburn on the roof of her mouth, which is not a place I'd recommend sunscreen. So maybe if you're breathing through your mouth, you might want to have what this little kiddo has, which is a nice neck gaiter to cover up. But you can get sunburn even pretty significant sunburn in the depths of winter. And WTA and our resources, we do have a full packing list available if you'd like to check that out.
Oh, can I add something, Polly?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I would also recommend, I have gotten sunburn on inside my nose, very uncomfortable. Would not recommend it. And I know now to put sunscreen under my nose. Another thing though that I experienced was the chapstick I was wearing, I thought was SPF, but it was not. And that made my lips swell up. So having that SPF in your chapstick also really helps.
Oh, that's such a good point. I've made the same mistake. I love Burt's Bees.
Yeah.
No SPF. So I have a separate chapstick that is only in my hiking equipment so that I don't forget.
Yep, that's what I do too now.
So before you even leave home, some important factors to consider. Is the trailhead accessible with recent weather? Because particularly in central Washington, so I tried to limit the hikes that I want to talk about tonight to ones that I think are pretty reasonable access, but not all county roads are maintained through the winter months. And particularly if there's been a major snowstorm that includes blowing and drifting snow, it can take a while before the roads are cleared as well. So even once the storm is over, it may require a little extra research to make sure that the snowplows have made it through to all of those remote roads and that the trailhead itself has been plowed out. This time of the year, sunrise is super late and sunset is super early. And I have made that mistake before of being caught out a little bit later than I thought. It's why part of the 10 essentials is to throw in a headlamp. And I have made that mistake before and hiked out in the dark. And it's a lot more fun if you have a source of light. But do check the times for those. And it's daylight is extending a little bit. I was so happy this morning because it was 7 o'clock and I could see daylight already. So it's getting a little bit better, but this time of the year is rough in terms of it gets dark super early and it can sneak up on you. It's also, for that reason, important to research what are the park hours of the place you want to go to. So particularly for state parks, oftentimes park hours end at dusk. And so that can be important to know ahead of time. And then check to see if a parking pass is required. Look at the forecast for the day that you're going to be there. Is the weather going to change while you're out? Do that research about what's going to be best to have on your feet. How are the roads getting there? And then really super important, make sure that someone at home knows what the plan is, like where you're going, what time you're expected back. And that way, if you're overdue, people know where to start searching. Anything to add, Shelby?
Nope, that was great. I was shushing my cat, so.
So I just pulled this one as an example. This is what our hiking guide entry looks like for Northrop Canyon. And the one that I really wanted to highlight here is that within our hiking guide, you can get a description of what to expect on the hike. It'll tell you information about mileage and elevation gain. It will have a little map that has driving directions to get to the trailhead. It has information about which guidebooks and maps are for that area. And then there's also a direct link to the weather forecast. So I pulled this screenshot a couple of weeks ago when it was super cold and we had all that snow coming in. So this is an important one to look at, where it seems like if I had all of the days available to go hiking that week, Wednesday looks like my best shot out of this forecast. And certainly when we've got those winter weather advisories, those might be days to avoid one of these hikes. And then a little bit of information on maps and navigation. So it's very important to know how to use the maps and navigation that you have with you. Paper or digital can be fine, but do have a backup battery, particularly in the winter. If you're relying on a cell phone for navigation, cell phone batteries tend to be drained far more quickly during cold weather. And so have a backup battery if your cell phone is your main form of navigation. I like to have a paper map, and there are the green trail maps, which are really awesome, and they don't cover a whole lot of things in central Washington. So if you are going to a place where a green trail map covers, that's excellent in terms of the resource. But because I frequently go to places that Green Trail Maps don't cover, I like to use Frugal Navigator. So it's a website, it's a company that's actually based in the Spokane area, and it's print on demand. And so I can plan a trip enough ahead of time in order to receive the maps, but this is one where you can go to the website and order maps, and they ship for free, and they're relatively inexpensive. I think they are about $9 for a map, and they're double-sided, tear-resistant, water-resistant paper, and they're the USGS topographical maps, so they're a really high-quality map. If you're really lucky, there are some maps that the land managers make available for free, which is always nice. BLM has excellent maps that are a little bit small scale, so it can't be used easily for like on the ground navigation, but it really does a great job of showing you the size of the property, and if there are hiking trails and parking areas for that area, it will have it. And I know that BLM has offices in Wenatchee and Spokane. And then a lot of their maps are also available through their website where you can just print it from home. And then in terms of phone navigation, I tend to use Gaia. And I know that there are a lot of other popular apps available. But any of those mapping apps on your phone can be really useful as long as you do have that backup battery. And then some additional resources through WTA. So I always recommend before you go, check out that hiking guide, see trip reports, see has someone been to that area recently, and what conditions did they report for whatever the most recent trip report was. Although, to be honest, sometimes in Central Washington, the latest trip report was actually a few months ago. It might be for a different season. And so there is the extent to which you have to be adventurous as well. But if there is a recent trip report, it can be very useful. And then please be useful for the next person who wants to go by leaving your own trip report as well. We have great tips for families in our Families Go Hiking section of our website. We do have that forecast link on the hiking guide entry, so you can determine what the weather forecast is. And then for on your hike, there are WTA printable maps for certain hikes. Land manager maps, Gaia is the one I recommended in terms of a mapping app. And then if you don't yet have the WTA Trailblazer app, I recommend that one as well. So it downloads onto your smartphone. It is a free app, and it helps you find trails all over the state. Like, I love to use it as I'm traveling. If I get to a point in my cross-state travels where I just need to get out and stretch my legs, I can open the Trailblazer app, and I can see which hikes are located closest to where I am currently located. So it's a great way to discover new hikes across the state. And then when you get home, don't forget to write that trip report. So here we're ready to go. Here's some of our suggested hikes in Central Washington. And we're going to start off with Chelan County, which is Shelby's area of expertise.
Okay, yeah, so I'm going to start off with the Wenatchee Crest Trail. So this is one of my favorite winter hikes that I've done, like in the mountains, kind of a snowshoe hike. So this is located in the middle of Blewett Pass, and it actually kind of like weaves back and forth. It's in both Chelan and Kittitas County borders. And the trailhead is really easily accessed right off of 97, but it does require a snow park pass. So you have to kind of plan ahead there. And this trail is a 6-mile out and back trail, and it has a pretty consistent but moderately graded incline to it. But since it's an out and back, it's a nice, easy trail. Like if you're only feeling, you get on the trail and you're only feeling maybe 4 miles, you just go 2 miles in, and then you turn around. And with this trail, you get these like beautiful cascade mountain views within about the first mile or so of the hike. So you don't have to go too far to get to get the views in on this hike. And it's a pretty popular hike for a winter hike. And so the boot, it does get packed down, the snow. So when I've been on it, I've seen people like snowshoeing, I've seen people hiking, running, cross-country skiing on this trail. But because it depends on the snow conditions, I always check both WTA, and I also like to use the All Trails to check trail conditions before going. Sometimes you can leave the snowshoes and micro spikes, and that's why I've seen a lot of runners on this trail too, because when it's packed down, you don't need either to be on this trail.
Uh-oh, now it's frozen.
Oh.
Trying to advance the slide. Oh, and I went too far too fast. Here we go now.
Okay, and then next is the Old Tumwater Pipeline Trail, which is a shorter hiking option in the winter, and it's right outside of Leavenworth along Highway 2. So it's easily accessed off of Highway 2, and you don't need any pass to do this trail. It's shorter once you cross over the border, which is a really scenic view over the winter. I love it when there's snow on the rocks, and there's this great contrast between the snow and like the dark rocks and the trees. But once you get over the river or over the river across the bridge, it's about a mile hike or so. But it does run along the river, which is nice because it usually covers up the sounds and the cars passing on Highway 2.
Then we'll move into Douglas County. And for Douglas County, we actually struggled to find some really excellent winter accessible hikes. There are other hikes out here that I love for in the spring, and I feel like they're probably not super accessible in winter. I have my doubts about some of the plowing for some of the like more remote trail systems. But the one that I've been to that I think is probably accessible in all except the most severe winter storms is the Govan Recreation Site. And with this one, it's just a little way south of Highway 2. It's on BLM land, so that means no passes are required. This is a very short trail. It's only a half mile, but it has some really cool interpretive signage. It can be one of the first places to look for spring flowers. Like buttercups can start popping up in February out there. And I don't know if anybody else has an informal competition among friends to find the first buttercup in February, but certainly I do that with my friends. And this is a really good place to try. It does have some great options for off-trail exploration and also just some really cool options for photography in this area. It's not part of the BLM land, but this is where the old Govan school site is, which is a very frequently photographed location. And it's very close by, like you basically drive past it on your way to this recreation site. So really kind of a cool area to explore. And then within this county, there are a lot of options that are right on the border of it, and then more options available as the roads start to melt out in the springtime. And then Ferry County, like, am I allowed to choose favorites in counties? Like, I love heading up to Ferry County. I actually have a bumper sticker on my car that says I heart Ferry County. And so I spend a lot of time up in Ferry County. And this first suggestion, it's kind of like a 3 for the price of 1 sort of recommendation. So right out of Sherman Pass at Highway 20, there are multiple hikes that take off from this very same trailhead. It is a snow park area, so a snow park permit is required in winter. But the first one I'll talk about is Sherman Pass and Sherman Peak. And then this trail system connects all the way out to Snow Peak Cabin. So you park at Highway 20. The parking lot is actually on the north side of the highway, and so you just have to cross the highway, and then you head onto the Sherman Pass loop. This is the one where I showed that map that shows the slope angle. And so I do say It's not recommended to do the full Sherman Peak Loop. It's a beautiful summer route. I also highly recommend it for the month of June when the lupin are in bloom up there. But in the wintertime, there have been avalanches over the years on that east aspect. And so typically, as I do the Sherman Peak Loop, I just go around the west side of the loop and I skip the east side entirely. It's not a loop for me in the winter. But for those of you who like to go to the high points, Sherman Peak is the 5th tallest mountain in Ferry County, and it does not have a trail that leads to it in the summer. But if you hike around to the south side of the Sherman Peak Loop, there's a fairly easy access to hike up to the summit of the mountain in the wintertime. It's a really rocky summit, so it makes it not fun to do in the summertime. It's possible, but there's not a trail, and it's a lot of rock hopping. In the winter, it's this nice, gentle snow slope where you can head right up to the top. And on a clear day, the views up there are just absolutely fantastic. And then adjacent to this, just a little bit farther south of Sherman Peak, is Snow Peak Cabin. The tricky part about Snow Peak Cabin is it is probably the most popular Forest Service rentable cabin that exists in the state. I've only managed to stay in it once. And you have to haunt the recreation.gov website in order to snag a spot in this cabin. It's very, very popular. But if you check out recreation.gov, maybe refresh it constantly in hopes that someone cancels, you can rent this cabin, and it's fairly inexpensive. I believe it's about $30 or $40 a night, and it sleeps 4 people. And it's a hiking cabin. So it's located about 5 miles in on the trail system. So it's a challenging winter backpacking trip, but it has a wood burning stove and it has a propane cook stove inside of it. And it's just a phenomenal winter backpacking trip. And then night photography. I was there, the night I was there, it was lucky enough that it was a full moon and it was clear. And it was like, well, I mean, you can see the snow sparkling like there's diamonds out there or something. So it's a really gorgeous location. Highly recommend. But in the event you are not lucky on recreation.gov and you can't snag this one, the other thing that I like to do is head to the north side of Sherman Pass. So this is Columbia Mountain. So very same parking lot as the last one. Snow park permit still required. This one also has some avalanche terrain located on the northeast aspect. So there is a Columbia Mountain loop to do in the summertime that is not recommended at all in the wintertime. But if you stay on the southwest aspect, it's nice, gentle terrain, and it's a really cool time to go backpacking up there. I don't recommend backpacking Columbia Mountain in the summer because there's not water. You'd have to hike quite a ways to get to a water source if you were up there in the summertime. But in the winter, you can melt snow for water. And so if there's anyone who's curious about winter backpacking, this is one of my favorite places to go. We actually are doing WTA trail work up there in February, where we'll be camping at the trailhead instead of backpacking in. But it is a really great place to, like, if you're starting to venture out into winter camping and winter backpacking, this is a fun place to do it because the hike from the trailhead to the summit is only approximately 4 miles. So it's not, you're never very far away from the road and civilization. And it's just beautiful views up there. That was another one that I did on a full moon night. And then this is what it can look like during daylight hours. So I was standing on the trail leading up to Columbia Mountain for this one and taking a photo looking towards Sherman Peak on the other side of the highway. And then Ferry County Rail Trail. This one, if you are looking for something that is flat and easy, this one is a fantastic one to do. So it's a converted railway line. It has multiple access points. So my favorites include the Kiwanis Trailhead at the northwest end of Curlew Lake, which is where this photo is taken. There's also a trailhead at the town of Curlew, and there are other access points along the way because the full length of the trail is 25 miles. It's really good for just a hike if there's no snow, snowshoeing when there's a little bit of snow, and occasionally it's able to be groomed for skiing. And then unfortunately, I had to cross out the part on the bottom because the Ferry County Rail Trail Ski Day was scheduled for this Saturday. And unfortunately, due to the lack of recent snow, like we had really good snow last Friday. And last Friday, it was all systems go. And then I got the email yesterday that it's been called off because of how much melting we've experienced in the last week. But I do believe that they intend to continue to groom as conditions allow. So if you're interested in Nordic skiing, I think the majority of the grooming takes place close to the Kiwanis Trailhead at Curlew Lake. But then there's also some grooming right out of the town of Curlew heading north up towards the tunnel. But it's really beautiful up there. Great place to go. And this one, like of all the hikes, this is probably the flattest one you'll find because it's a railroad grade. And then I really love winter camping. So I threw in this one as well. 13 Mile Canyon, which is just south of Republic. It doesn't have to be a backpacking trip, but that's kind of my favorite way to experience it. But it's just a lovely canyon hike to the top of that first hill. So from the parking lot, which is right off of Highway 21, pretty easy hike to the top of the first hill. It is steep, but it's not a very long distance hike, so it's quite a bit of elevation gain. It's maybe moderately challenging. And I find this is another one where I wouldn't necessarily recommend backpacking there in the summer because of the lack of water access. But for winter, when you can melt snow, it makes it a better backpacking location. And so there's a picture that a friend of mine took of my tent when we were camped on Cougar Mountain, which is along the trail at 13 Mile. This one does eventually lead to 13 Mile Mountain, which I've never done in the wintertime. So I think for this trail, as a summer hike, I believe it's up to about, I mean, probably it really is about 13 miles to do the full thing in the summer. I find that the winter version is typically a 3 to 5 mile version, as like the most logical point for a turnaround right around the summit of Cougar Mountain. And then we'll move over to Grant County. So Steamboat Rock State Park, this one is probably one you've heard of before, but if you haven't experienced it yet, I highly recommend it. And winter is one of my favorite times to go there because, well, it's the only time I've ever been there because I have heard that there's quite a few rattlesnakes in the summer, and it's also just kind of hot and exposed in the summertime. So I think winter and spring are really the ideal times to go and visit Steamboat Rock State Park. This one should be considered moderately difficult, mainly due to the access trail. So from the state park, it starts out on double track. It's like a converted road. And then in order to access the top of Steamboat Rock, there is a pretty significant climb and it's fairly steep. And in my experience, you need both your feet and your hands in order to get up to the top of that. And so it's not a great one if you have any concerns about stability of your footing and just the need to poles definitely recommended for this one. But once you get up on top of the bluff, then it's beautiful, not a lot of elevation gain once you're at the top. It's really well known for its wintering wildlife viewing. So there's a herd of mule deer that just live up there. And they tend to not be very afraid of humans. So I was amazed at how close I was able to get to them without scaring them off. It's important to keep dogs on a leash for this one because it is more challenging for wintering wildlife if they get chased by dogs at all. And so leashes are required here, but really cool for the wildlife viewing. And then also just the view from the cliffs looking out over the river. And if you are camping curious, there is a year-round campground right at the state park, which I always think is a lot of fun too. I actually haven't camped at this one yet, but it's on my to-do list of trips that I really want to do soon, because not only is there Steamboat Rock, if you're camping there, then that makes it really easy to pair it with Northrop Canyon, which is basically right across the road. And so for Northrop Canyon, it's up to 6.2 miles. But I think Shelby kind of explained this already too. With any of these, you can turn around when you feel like you want to turn around. And so the 6.2 miles, I think, is if you go all the way up to the lake at the very end. But there is an old homestead site that's not as far a hike, and it's also a little bit flatter terrain. So the easier version of this one is to the homestead site. And then there is a lake that's up above. This is another one that has a lot of wintering wildlife, so great place for wildlife watching. And because of its proximity to Steamboat Rock State Park, you could do both of those trips together. If you are feeling super ambitious, you can do them both in the same day. I do know of people who have done that. But I think that the mellow way to do it, if you consider wintering camping mellow, would be to camp at the state park and then do one hike one day and one hike the next day. Just another picture of Northrop Canyon and one of the old homestead sites that's up there. There's several old buildings, and these are open. You can go look inside of them, which is kind of cool. And then a little bit to the south, we've got Beverly Bridge, Palouse to Cascade State Park Trail. So this one is relatively new. And if you haven't been there yet, I highly recommend it. It's a pedestrian-only bridge that crosses the Columbia River. So there's parking on either side. So it can be like you head to Vantage, and I guess truly to stay within Grant County, you need to go to the Beverly side, but you can also go to the other side of the river to start. There's a trailhead at either end. And this is another great one if you want relatively easy, super flat. It's a converted railroad grade as well. And oh, actually, this is the very easiest one because where it crosses the river, perfectly level. So a little bit of elevation change on the approach to the bridge and then perfectly level across the bridge. And where else can you walk around across the Columbia River and not have to worry about vehicles? So really, really cool. And then they have these viewing platforms all along the route where there's these little benches. And so this is a picture that my friend and I did. We actually did this as a camping trip earlier this winter, where we visited Beverly Bridge, and it was a beautiful sunny day. And then that night it started snowing like crazy and we camped nearby. So I didn't include this as one of the hike options, but there are several campgrounds that are operated by Grant County PUD that are located in the vicinity. So we ended up staying at Jackson Creek Fish Camp that night, and it snowed and it was super cold, but it was really beautiful. But fortunately, while we were at Beverly Bridge, it was a beautiful sunny day. And I just love these benches where you can just sit and take in the view. And this one is like Beverly itself, 3 miles if you do an out and back across the bridge, super easy. But if you're looking for a real challenge, 287 miles all the way across the state. And then Shelby, this one is yours.
Yeah. So this is this hike is one of the reasons why I love living in Central Washington, because we have such a diverse landscape that we can go to. We can go to like snow-capped mountains, or we can be on sand dunes, and it seems almost like you're at the beach. So this is another one of my favorite Central Washington hikes in Grant County. So this is the Hanford Reach, and the White Bluffs that are on the north side. So this is like a gorgeous hike along the Columbia River. There are steep rocky cliffs on this hike, as well as multiple different sand dunes. And there's also no pass required to go to this hike. And I also got to this trailhead driving in my Nissan Sentra. So it's very accessible in any kind of car that you're in. Now I have my Subaru, so I'm fine, and I don't have to check trail reports about that. But when I had my Sentra, I was always checking trail reports to make sure my car could get to the trailhead. So also in Grant County, I'm in Vantage a lot, and when the sun is out and it's 40 degrees, it feels like it's a 50-degree day. So really in the winter time, it's not super uncommon to get these 40-degree sunny days. It feels like it's t-shirt weather in the winter. So this is a 5.6-mile hike, but there are sand dunes along the way, so you don't, again, have to go the full 5.6 miles if you don't want to. There's a little bit of elevation gain on this trip, on this trail, and it's mostly at the beginning, so don't be scared off by the elevation at the start. It levels out after the elevation gain. What I would recommend, I've been on this trail a few times, and one of the trail times that I went out here, it was super windy. And when there was a lot of wind, it wasn't quite as enjoyable. You're on sand dunes, so you get sand like whipped in your eyes and in your mouth because I kept talking. So I would just check the forecast ahead, make sure you're not going on a windy day. Sunny and calm day is what I would recommend for this trail.
And then I've got Rimrock Lake, which is part of the Columbia National Wildlife Refuge. This one is a great introduction to Columbia National Wildlife Refuge, and there are several other trails in the area. I had to like limit myself. And so I really loved all the little pothole lakes you could see from this one. This was a trip I did in February a couple of years ago. So you can see that the little lakes are frozen. And so since the lakes were frozen, not a whole lot of birds out on them at that time. But this is also a place that's really good for birding opportunities. The peak sandhill crane migration happens here in March and April. So as winter transitions into spring, really good birding opportunities as well. But even on a January, February trip, really interesting landscape out there, like the rock outcroppings and the little lakes are just gorgeous. So really a fun one, and especially a great one for birders to consider. And then we'll transition over to Okanogan County. So this is another one of my personal favorites. It is mainly a Nordic ski area, and I happen to be a Nordic skier as well, but it has a dedicated snowshoe trail that's roughly, I think, 2 to 2.5 miles round trip that leads to the warming center that's located on the trail system. So it's a snow park lot. There's a bathroom right at the trailhead, and then you can hike into this really cute little warming hut that was built by some of the Nordic skiers in the area. There's a little club up there dedicated to it. And the thing that was really surprising to me, I was there last winter, both snowshoeing and skiing, and I noticed at the trailhead register that there was this large group of people who'd signed in from Tacoma. And then while I was up there, some more folks arrived and they said that they were birding. And I said, oh, wow, like there were some other birders who were here from Tacoma. And they said, well, we're here from Olympia. So it's like this statewide draw. And as I started chatting with them to find out what type of birding one does up there in the wintertime, I discovered that it is a popular wintering ground for great gray owls, which we did not see while we were there. But I was just amazed that here I thought it was a really cool snowshoe and ski trail. And actually, I think the majority of the people who were there the weekend I was there were there to look for great gray owls. So if you're a birder, this is another cool place to go and a cool reason to go visit this one. And certainly if you are also a Nordic skier, highly recommend the Nordic ski trails up there. But it's just a really interesting landscape. This is kind of where the flats meet the mountains. And so it has really beautiful terrain and lots of trees, but also just lots of big open areas as you're driving to this one. And then Peregrine State Park. This one is a snow park in the wintertime. So Discover Pass in the summer, snow park in the winter. And the Rex Dare Trail at this site is groomed for multi-use, and they actually do groom it, and they pack the trail system down. And so on a day where there's a lot of snow and it's cold enough, you probably would not even need to use snowshoes or microspikes. Certainly on the day I was there, we didn't find that we needed to, because you can probably tell by how bundled up my friend is. It was really cold that day. This was actually just a couple of weeks ago. I think it was -15 when we left the cabin that morning. It was a cold one. So we bundled up, but even when it's -15, if it's sunny out, why not get outside? And they'd recently groomed the trail, so you could actually see the groom marks there. And it's groomed for hiking and snowshoe use, and it's also really popular with fat bike enthusiasts. And Nordic skiing is a permitted use as well. So they just ask folks to please not leave divots that are more than an inch deep in the trail system. So if you're there on a day where the snow is soft, they would want you to wear snowshoes so that you're not creating post holes in the groomed route. But it's a really nice trail, really beautiful views. Like, I was shocked the day I was there, the clarity we had. We could look right up into the North Cascades, and it was just absolutely gorgeous. And when I was there, we just did the out and back. It was too cold for us to want to hike all the way around the lake, but it can be up to a 6-mile hike to hike all the way around the lake. And then there's just a short connection back on the main road. And those are our suggested hikes. So just a reminder that WTA is powered by hikers, which means if you go to any of these places that we've talked about, I would love to see your trip reports afterwards. Help share that information with others. And don't forget to use the resources that are available through WTA.org. But at this point, I will finish up the presentation. Do want to mention that my contact email is on here. If you have additional questions later, feel free to reach out. But thank you so much for coming tonight, and then we'd open it up for questions.
Holly and Shelby, thank you so much. I'm always so inspired by these talks, and I have notes of all the places I want to go now. And I love how you're talking about some of these hikes are actually better in winter, because I think with the idea of the program, I'm like, oh, what are the options? I just had more of a limited view. So it's really cool and inspiring to hear that some of these places are even better in the wintertime. Yeah, I love that. And if people have questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hand. We'd love to call on you. The other thing was the rail trails. I think it looked like we had a lot of avid hikers on here, but I think the rail trails is such a good reminder of like anybody can get out there and enjoy the season. And yeah, the Beverly Bridge, I'm really excited about that one. It's a very beautiful part of the state. So I want to go check that one out. We've got about 5 minutes left, so if there's any questions, we've got 2 experts here to give you all that insider info. So think about that. And then the other shout out I was going to give was that when you're talking about Rimrock Lake, I have not gone there, but I have spent time in the Columbia National Wildlife Refuge, and there's just endless exploring there. I also kayak, and yeah, there's lots of beautiful places. So I feel like that's a great space just to start and do all the hikes there. Great, guys, and thanks. And also, we had some really great comments in the chat. I think hikers are just wonderful community builders, sharing insights and some tips, which was really great to see. One was don't do steamboat with a baby carrier. I thought that was really helpful info. So lots of thank yous. Can't wait to check it out. People have added things to their list. Oh, Roshini says, which side should we hike in winter for Sherman Peak? If you could just remind us on that.
Yeah, so from the trailhead, I always do it would be the northwest aspect around. So yeah, like it does, the summer trail makes a full loop. And if you just make sure that when you get to the junction, you take the west side. That's the way to go.
Great, thank you. That's super helpful. Awesome. Oh, what about Nason Ridge recommendations?
Shelby, do you have experience with Nason Ridge?
No, I don't. Sorry.
So I think that's one for us all to go check out. I'm always trying to find areas I haven't been to yet, and that's one of the ones that I haven't been to yet. So
ooh, just stump Holly is a lot because I feel like you're always out. You're Craig Jr.
I'm gonna quote that.
Yeah, do it. Thanks from Mark in Spokane. Thanks for joining us from Spokane. Come over to Central Washington and explore our beautiful hikes. Great. Okay. Well, it looks like any last call for questions. I think everybody's just feeling inspired and ready to get out on the trail. So You all were super clear and helpful with your information. So I think we'll just wrap it up there. So thank you once again to Holly and Shelby. So wonderful to have your expertise and knowledge. Just remind us of all the beautiful ways we can get out and be active. If you all want to find out more information, WTA.org is an amazing resource. The trip reports are incredible. So that's just some fun reading to do. And this program is being recorded. So I will be sending that out as soon as it's uploaded to our YouTube channel. So it might be a day or so, but I will send that out in an email. So thank you, everyone. And we appreciate your time and being here. And I hope everyone has a great evening. Bye.
Thank you so much.